The air in the penthouse was thick with the scent of old money and new disdain. Crystal glasses clinked, a sound as brittle as the smiles exchanged over canapes that cost more than most people's daily wages. At the center of the opulent room stood Alara, a woman whose social standing was as meticulously curated as the art on her walls, holding court. Her son, Kael, lingered near the floor-to-ceiling windows, a silent silhouette against the glittering cityscape. He was uncomfortable in the stiff, tailored suit, his posture too straight, his gaze too assessing for a simple cocktail party. "And what is it you do, Kael?" a portly man dripping with gold asked, his tone condescending. "Your mother tells us so little." Before Kael could form a reply, Alara swept in, a tinkling laugh escaping her lips. "Oh, don't bother him with such dull talk, Charles. Kael is between ventures. He's always had such a peculiar fondness for the outdoors. Quite the hunter, you know." She said the word hunter as if it were a slightly embarrassing childhood phase, like collecting beetles. She patted Kael's arm, her voice dropping to a dismissive murmur meant only for him, but carrying just far enough. "He's only a hunter, dear. Don't bore them with the details." A flicker of something cold and ancient passed behind Kael's eyes, but it was gone in an instant, replaced by a placid, unreadable mask. He simply gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod and turned back to the window, the ghost of a smile playing on his lips. It was a smile that held no warmth, but the quiet certainty of a man who knew the weight of a single well-placed bullet. The party swirled on, oblivious, but the universe, it seemed, had a cruel sense of timing. The first sign of trouble was a distant pop, followed by the shattering of a champagne flute on the marble terrace. Confusion rippled through the crowd. The second pop was closer, and the man named Charles crumpled to the floor, a dark, blooming stain on his pristine white shirt. Panic erupted. Screams tore through the air as the guests became a frantic herd, scrambling for cover. The city lights, once a symbol of serene wealth, felt like 1,000 watching eyes. Alara stood frozen, her hand clamped over her mouth, her social armor shattered. It was then that Kael moved. The shift in him was instantaneous and absolute. The man who had been a placid statue at the window was now a coil of focused energy. He grabbed his mother by her shoulders, his grip firm and sure, and shoved her behind the solid oak bar. "Stay down. Don't move," he commanded, his voice low and gravelly, a tone she had never heard from him before. It brooked no argument. He didn't run. He didn't hide. While others cowered, Kael's eyes were scanning the room, calculating sightlines, assessing threats. He moved to the main electrical panel, hidden behind a decorative screen, and with a single, decisive flick plunged the penthouse into darkness, save for the erratic strobe of the city's neon signs filtering through the windows. "What are you doing?" Alara hissed from her hiding place, her voice trembling. "You'll get us killed!" Kael didn't answer. He was already at his discarded suit jacket, retrieving a small flat case from an inner pocket. He clicked it open. Inside, nestled in custom-molded foam, wasn't a wallet or a phone, but a disassembled, high-precision, long-range rifle scope and a series of complex-looking tools. With practiced, unhurried efficiency, his fingers, which had seemed so clumsy holding a champagne flute, began to assemble the device. He moved to the window, using a specialized tool to silently remove a large pane of glass, creating a perfect aperture. The cold night air rushed in. He mounted the scope not to a rifle, but to the window frame itself, turning it into a powerful observation spot. He lay prone on the cold floor, his body perfectly still, his right eye pressed against the eyepiece. Through the crosshairs, the chaotic city became a grid. He filtered out the panic behind him, the screaming, the sobbing. His world shrank to the view through the lens. He tracked the trajectory of the shots, his mind building a three-dimensional map of the surrounding rooftops. And then he saw it. A faint glint of light on a high crane at a construction site 3 blocks away, the sniper's nest. "Security is on their way," a brave but terrified guest whispered into a phone. "They said 10 minutes." Kael's voice cut through the darkness, calm and unnervingly steady. "We don't have 10 minutes. He's repositioning. Next shot is in 45 seconds. He has a line of sight to this bar." Ilara's blood ran cold. How could he know that? How could he possibly know that? It was in that moment, huddled on the cold floor, watching her son's absolute transformation, that the fragile facade of her world finally cracked. The dismissive words, "He's only a hunter," echoed in her mind, now sounding not just condescending, but profoundly, dangerously ignorant. The way he moved, the authority in his voice, the terrifying specificity of his knowledge. This was not a man who tracked deer. This was a man who understood the art of long-range death. The truth, cold and hard as the marble beneath her, began to dawn. Her son, her quiet, enigmatic son, was not just a hunter. He was an elite special ops sniper. A silence fell over the penthouse, thick and heavy as a burial shroud. The only sounds were the ragged breaths of the terrified guests and the distant, indifferent wail of a siren. All eyes, those that dared to peek from their hiding places, were fixed on Kael's prone form, backlit by the city's neon pulse. He was a statue, his breathing so shallow it seemed to have stopped entirely. The world outside the window was a tapestry of 1,000 lights, but for Kael, it had been reduced to a single dark square 3 blocks away. Ilara watched, her mind reeling, a torrent of fragmented memories crashing against the horrifying present. The long, unexplained absences he'd dismissed as wilderness retreats. The way he could always tell if someone was lying, his gaze seeming to strip away layers of pretense. The impossible calm he exhibited in any crisis, from a car accident to a kitchen fire, as if he were assessing a tactical problem, not a personal disaster. She had called it aloofness. She saw now it was a predator's patience. Inside the scope's crystal-clear circle, the world was perfectly still. Kael's finger, which had been resting lightly on the window frame, twitched. He wasn't just looking, he was reading. Reading the wind, gauging the slight distortion of the air through the heat rising from the city streets, calculating the minute curvature of the earth over such a distance. His mind was a supercomputer, processing variables she couldn't even conceive of. "He's found a new target," Kael murmured, his voice so low it was almost a vibration in the floorboards. A gasp came from behind a leather sofa. The woman in question, a statuesque blonde, began to sob quietly, her body trembling uncontrollably. "How can you know that?" Ilara whispered, her voice cracking. Kael didn't turn. Her silhouette is backlit by the emergency exit sign he just shot out. He's testing the light, making her a better contrast. He's methodical, professional. There was no fear in his tone, only a cold, analytical respect for a fellow craftsman. It was this, more than anything, that chilled Ilara to her soul. Then he began to speak again, but this time his words were not for them. They were a steady, rhythmic stream of data into the tiny microphone bud he had seamlessly placed in his ear. "Ghost 1, sitrep. I have visual on the nest. Single shooter male, confirmed on the jib arm of the north-facing crane, King construction site. He's using a suppressed 308, maybe a modified M24. He's good. Took 2 clean shots before I could get a lock.
A burst of static, then a tinny, professional voice responded, audible only to Kael. "Copy, Ghost 1. ETA on tactical team is 7 minutes. Can you maintain observation?" "Negative," Kael said, his eye never leaving the scope. "The target is mobile on the crane. He's setting up for his next shot. The Zurich asset is in his kill zone. He will fire in approximately 20 seconds. He paused, his body tensing almost imperceptibly, requesting permission for a sonic disruption. Ilara didn't understand the term, but the intent was clear in the grim set of his jaw. He wasn't just observing, he was engaging. "Permission granted, Ghost 1. Use non-lethal measures. We need him alive for interrogation." In one fluid motion, Kael reached into another hidden compartment of his case and retrieved a device that looked like a large, boxy pistol. He attached it to a rail on the scope's mount. He took a final slow breath, let half of it out, and his entire being became still. The chaos in the room, the sobbing, the fear, it all vanished. There was only the shot. He didn't pull a trigger. There was no loud report. Instead, there was a deep, concussive thump that felt more like a physical blow to the chest than a sound. The air in the penthouse vibrated. Through his scope, Kael saw the effect. A high-intensity sonic wave, invisible to the eye, traveled the 3 blocks in an instant and struck the crane's jib arm. The sniper, who had been in a perfect firing position, was thrown violently sideways as the metal around him reverberated like a struck gong. The shot he had been about to take went wild, pinging harmlessly off the crane's massive counterweight.
"Target disrupted," Kael reported, his voice still eerily calm. "He's disoriented. May attempt to flee. The crane's ladder is his only viable egress." He was no longer just a shield. He was a puppeteer, dictating the movements of his enemy from 1,000 yards away. He tracked the figure as it scrambled, a dark blot against the steel girders, now desperate and uncoordinated. "He's descending, moving west on the crane arm. He's leaving his rifle. He knows he's been compromised." The guests began to stir, a fragile hope flickering in the darkness. The immediate threat was over, but Kael remained at his post, his eyes still glued to the scope, his body a line of unwavering tension. The mission wasn't over. It had simply entered a new phase. He was now the hunter, and the concrete jungle had just become his domain. The real game was about to begin. The silence that followed the sonic blast was different now. It was no longer the silence of pure terror, but one of awe, thick and disbelieving. The sobs had subsided to shaky breaths, the panic replaced by a bewildered focus on the man by the window. He was their anchor in the chaos, a stranger they had all dismissed minutes before. Kael's voice cut through the quiet, still low and directed into his comms, but now the guests hung on every syllable. "He's on the descent ladder, moving fast but clumsy. Right ankle is compromised from the fall." A pause, his head tilting slightly as he listened to a voice in his ear. "Understood. I have the only clean line of sight. I'll talk your team in." Ilara watched, her mind a whirlwind of shame and a terrifying, dawning pride. She saw the absolute focus in the line of his shoulders, the way his fingers, resting near the scope's adjustment dials, were perfectly steady. This was not the boy she had tried to mold into a corporate heir. This was a man who commanded the darkness. "Echo Team, this is Ghost 1, Kael continued, his voice a monotone of pure data. "Subject is 40 feet from ground level. He's favoring the left side. He'll exit the construction site to the west, into the service alley. There's a storm drain cover 20 yards to the south of the gate, loose. He'll head for it. It's his only play." He was predicting the man's movements not just from what he could see, but from a deep understanding of a cornered operative's psychology. He was thinking 3 steps ahead, seeing the city not as streets and buildings, but as a chessboard of escape and pursuit.
"Kael, Alara found herself whispering, the name feeling foreign on her lips, a plea and an apology. He didn't look back, but his voice softened a fraction, just for her. "It's all right, Mother. Just a few more minutes." The term mother felt different now. Not a title from a disappointed son, but a designation for a civilian under his protection. Through the scope, the world was a study in monochrome green and black. He saw the figure, a limping shadow, drop the last 10 feet from the ladder and hit the ground in a clumsy roll. Just as Kael had predicted, the man scrambled to his feet and immediately sprinted, a lopsided, pained gait toward the western chain-link fence. He scaled it with desperate, frantic energy, tearing his clothes on the barbed wire, and dropped into the dark service alley below. He's in the alley, turning south, approaching the drain cover. "Now, Echo Team, you have a 5-second window from the east entrance. He's pulling the pin on a smoke grenade. He's going to try to disappear." As if by his command, a thick plume of white smoke erupted in the alley, billowing and obscuring everything. The guests, who had begun to feel a glimmer of safety, gasped, their fear returning. He was getting away. But Kael's lips curled into a thin, hard smile. The smoke was a confirmation, not a setback. Thermal is useless in that, but he's committed. He's lifting the drain cover. Now, Echo, he's vulnerable. From their vantage point, the people in the penthouse saw nothing but a distant, foggy alley. But they heard it. A sharp, synchronized burst of movement. The crisp, authoritative commands of "Down! Down! Get on the ground!" carried on the night air, followed by the definitive click of handcuffs. Kael finally leaned back from the scope, his body uncoiling with a quiet sigh. He began to disassemble his equipment with the same ritualistic care with which he had assembled it, placing each piece back into its foam nest. The weapon of precision was becoming a harmless collection of parts once more. Ghost 1 to command. Asset is secure. The nest is yours. I am standing down. He removed the bud from his ear and tucked it away.
He turned to face the room. The suit was the same, but the man inside it was irrevocably changed. His gaze swept over the stunned faces, the wealthy and powerful, who were now looking at him not with condescension, but with a kind of reverent fear. His eyes finally landed on his mother. Alara stood up slowly, her legs weak. The words she had spoken so carelessly hung between them, pathetic and small. "Kael, I didn't know." He walked toward her, and for the first time she didn't see her awkward son, but a warrior returning from a battlefield only he could see. He stopped before her, his expression unreadable, but his eyes held a lifetime of unspoken stories. "I know you didn't," he said, his voice quiet, layered with a fatigue that went far beyond a single night's terror. It was better that way. Before she could form a response, the penthouse door burst open. But it wasn't the police or paramedics. 3 men in dark, unmarked tactical gear entered, moving with a fluid, predatory grace that mirrored Kael's own. They ignored everyone else, their focus solely on him. The lead man, his face all hard planes and sharp eyes, gave a curt nod. "The package is wrapped. Clean job, Ghost." Kael simply nodded back. The casual use of the call sign, the easy camaraderie of men who lived in the shadows, solidified the truth in the opulent room. This was his world. This was who he was. The man in the suit was the costume. The hunter by the window was the reality. And as the first official sirens finally wailed their way up the street, Alara understood that the night was not over. The authorities would have questions her son was uniquely equipped to answer, and a story to construct that would bury the truth of what they had all witnessed deep beneath the glittering surface of the city. The lead operative, a man with a scar tracing the line of his jaw and eyes that had seen too much, didn't wait for an introduction. The narrative is being spun.
A gas main explosion. A tragic accident during a corporate espionage attempt. The shooter is one of ours now. He'll be processed through the usual black channels. His voice was low, a gravelly whisper meant only for Kael and, by unavoidable extension, the stunned Ilara who stood frozen beside him. Kael gave a single, sharp nod. The cover is thin. There are too many witnesses here.
The operative, whose name tag read Johnson but was certainly no more his name than Ghost was Kael's, offered a grim, knowing smile. Witnesses see what they're told to see, especially the wealthy. They'll be debriefed, emphatically. They'll come to believe the gas leak story themselves within a week. It's cleaner that way. His eyes flickered to Ilara, a silent question hanging in the air. Kael's posture shifted almost imperceptibly, a subtle blocking of his mother from the operative's assessing gaze. She's not a problem. Johnson's smile didn't reach his eyes. They're all a problem until they're not. He gestured with his chin towards the case containing the disassembled scope. Clean yourself up. The spooks will be here in 90 seconds. You know the drill, the confused, traumatized civilian. As if summoned by his words, the elevator dinged, and the penthouse was suddenly flooded with a different kind of official presence. Crisp suits, polished badges, and the calm, authoritative demeanor of federal agents. They moved with bureaucratic efficiency, herding the shocked guests into separate areas of the vast apartment, their voices a soothing, firm murmur, promising safety and demanding cooperation. Kael watched it all unfold, his face a masterclass in the transition from elite operative to shell-shocked survivor. The sharp intensity in his eyes softened into a dazed confusion. The set of his shoulders slumped slightly, the picture of a man coming down from a massive adrenaline crash. He was disappearing right before his mother's eyes, the weapon being resheathed in a cloak of normalcy. An agent, a woman with a kind face and a steely gaze, approached them. "Mr. Vance? Ilara Vance. I'm Agent Miller. I know you've been through a terrible ordeal, but we need to ask you a few questions." Kael ran a hand through his hair, the picture of wearied distress. It was so fast. There were pops like fireworks. Then the lights went out. We just hid. I think I heard someone on the roof, maybe. It's all a blur. His voice had lost its commanding gravel and was now laced with a believable tremor. Ilara stared at him, her mind struggling to reconcile the two versions of her son. The liar was as flawless as the soldier had been. Agent Miller nodded, taking notes. "You're safe now. That's what matters." Her eyes fell on the open case beside Kael. "And this is?" Kael looked down at it as if noticing it for the first time. My astronomy equipment," he said, his voice hesitant. "I was showing some of the guests the constellations before all this happened. The city lights make it difficult, but with a good scope." He trailed off, shrugging with a convincing helplessness. The agent peered at the high-grade military optics and the sonic disruptor mount. To anyone else, it would have looked suspicious, but Kael's performance was perfect. He was just a rich man with a confusingly expensive hobby. Agent Miller made a note and moved on. When they were momentarily alone, Ilara grabbed Kael's arm, her fingers trembling. "Astronomy?" she whispered, her voice thick with a mixture of horror and a desperate need to understand. He turned to her, and for a fleeting second, the mask dropped. The soldier looked back at her. "Some stars are closer than others, Mother," he said, his voice low and devoid of its earlier feigned weakness. "And some need to be observed very carefully." Before she could process this, Johnson reappeared at Kael's side. "Car's here. Your debrief is at the usual place."
Then he turned his flat professional gaze to Alara. "Ma'am, you will be escorted home. A counselor will be provided. You are to speak to no one, especially not the press. The official statement will be released at 0600. It wasn't a request. It was an order. The world she knew, a world of social contracts and legalities, had been peeled back to reveal the raw, powerful machinery that operated beneath it. And her son was a crucial cog in that machine. She watched as Kael, her son, the astronomer, the hunter, the ghost, gave her one last unreadable look. Then he turned and followed Johnson, seamlessly merging with the other operatives. They moved as a single entity through the chaos of officialdom, and the sea of agents and police parted for them without a word. They didn't head for the main elevators with the other witnesses, but turned down a service corridor, a hidden artery of the building, and were gone. The penthouse felt suddenly, profoundly empty. The terror was over, but Alara knew, with a chilling certainty, that for her, the real mystery was only just beginning. The man she had raised was a stranger, and the life he led was a story she had only been allowed to read the first, terrifying page of.
The drive home was a silent, surreal procession in the back of a black SUV with tinted windows. A stern-faced woman from a department Alara didn't recognize sat beside her, not speaking. Her presence a wall of enforced silence. The city glided by, its normalcy a brutal contrast to the opera of violence and secrets she had just witnessed. They didn't speak of gas leaks. They didn't need to. The unspoken truth was a physical weight in the car. When she was finally alone in the cavernous silence of her own home, the dam broke. The polished marble floors and curated art felt like a stage set, a flimsy facade. She poured a glass of whiskey, her hands shaking so violently the crystal chattered against the decanter. She replayed every moment, every dismissed detail of Kael's life, seeing them now not as eccentricities, but as clues. The camping trips, from which he'd return with a stillness in his eyes that was more than peace. It was the quiet of a spent storm. The way he could disarm anyone in the room with a look, not of charm, but of sheer, unnerving assessment. The locked drawer in his old bedroom she'd once dismissed as a boy's privacy. Now she saw it for what it was, an arsenal of secrets. Her phone buzzed, shattering the silence. The screen showed a number she didn't recognize, but a cold intuition settled in her gut. She answered. There was a pause. Then his voice, stripped of its earlier theatrical tremor, but layered with a new, profound weariness. "Mother, are you safe?" The question felt absurd. He was never safe. He was danger itself. For now, the debrief is standard. He let the word hang, implying a world of procedures she could never imagine. "I need you to listen to me. The man who was shot, Charles, he wasn't a random target." Ilara's breath hitched. "What?" "He was the target. The party was the opportunity. This wasn't terrorism. It was a precision strike. Charles was funneling money through his philanthropic foundation. Dirty money. Arms dealers. The kind of people who make enemies in my world." "Your world," she echoed, the words tasting like ash. "And what world is that, Kael? Who do you work for?"
A longer pause this time, filled with the hum of a secure line. "I work for the people who balance the scales. Sometimes that means protecting a room full of people from a single bullet. Sometimes it means ensuring that bullet finds its intended guilty target." The revelation was a second explosion, rearranging the rubble of her understanding. The hero who had saved them all had also, in some cold, calculated way, been complicit. He had known why the shot was fired. He had let it happen. "You knew?" she whispered, the horror dawning. "You knew Charles was the target? You let that man fire?" "I contained the situation," he corrected, his voice hardening. "The shot on Charles was clean. The second shot, the one that started the panic, was the shooter covering his escape. My mission was to neutralize the threat to the other assets, the civilians, and to acquire the shooter for interrogation. Both objectives were met." He spoke in mission reports and cold metrics. Ilara felt the whiskey rise in her throat. "You used us. You used my party as bait in your war." "It's not a war, Mother. It's an ecosystem, and tonight a predator was removed. The method was messy, unavoidably so." He sighed, and for the first time she heard a crack in his armor, a sliver of the sun she thought she knew. "I never wanted you to see that. I never wanted you in that ecosystem. But I am in it now, aren't I? Because I know. I saw you." "Yes," he said, the single word final and heavy. "You are. Which is why you need to forget the astronomy story. The gas leak narrative is your truth now. Embrace it, believe it, for your own safety." The line went dead. Ilara stood in the center of her perfect silent living room, the phone clutched in her hand. She was no longer just a society matron. She was a keeper of a secret, a resident of a shadowy world she hadn't known existed, a world where her son was a ghost, a hunter, and a judge. The knock on her door, when it came, was firm and official. The counselor had arrived. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and walked toward the door. She had a part to play now, a role in the story he was writing, and for the first time, she understood that sophistication wasn't about knowing the right people or serving the right wine. It was about maintaining a flawless performance while the world, your world, crumbled into secrets and lies around you. The performance was just beginning.
The counselor, a man with a calm voice and eyes that held no warmth, spent 2 hours with her. He didn't counsel, he programmed. He repeated the details of the gas leak, the tragic chain of events, the fortunate intervention of federal agents who had been tracking the rogue elements responsible. He spoke slowly, deliberately, weaving a new reality for her, strand by synthetic strand. When he left, Ilara felt the new story settling over her memories like a fine layer of dust, blurring the sharp, terrifying edges of the truth. The following days were a study in surreal normalcy. The official statement was released. Condolence calls were made. The story was picked up and chewed over by the news cycles, becoming just another sensational tragedy, then fading into the background noise of the city. Her friends tiptoed around her, their voices laced with a pity that was now profoundly misplaced. They saw a victim. She felt like an imposter living in a house of cards. A week after the party, a small flat package arrived by courier. No return address. Inside, nestled in plain gray foam, was a single item, the ocular lens from his high-powered scope. It was flawless, a perfect circle of dark, polished glass. There was no note. It needed none. It was an artifact from his world, a silent acknowledgement of the truth they now shared. It was a warning and an invitation all at once. She held it up to the light, and for a moment she didn't see her reflection. She saw the city through his eyes, not a skyline of dreams, but a landscape of vectors, windage, and consequences. She saw the hunter, the guardian, the ghost who was her son. The boy she thought she'd raised was a carefully constructed legend, and the man he truly was stood in the shadows,
protecting a world that would never know his name. Ilara Vance placed the lens in the locked drawer of her bedside table, the one that had once held his secrets. She closed it, the click of the lock a definitive sound in the quiet room. She walked to the window of her penthouse, looking out at the glittering, oblivious city. The fear was gone, replaced by a formidable, quiet understanding. She was no longer just a society matron. She was the keeper of a secret, the guardian of a ghost. A smile, thin and full of a newfound strength, touched her lips. The performance was over. The mission, in its own way, had just begun. And in the profound silence, she knew one thing for certain. The world needed its hunters, and she would never, ever look at the shadows the same way again.